metro areas, Atlanta, where I live, or LA, even more so than in New York City, you have higher percentages of single family homes that are owned by those mega institutional holders.
The Weekly Friedman, your source for the most essential information in the default industry, with your host, Adam Friedman.
Last week, President Trump introduced a proposed ban on large institutional investors from purchasing single-family homes. We're going to walk through how this could potentially impact the default industry, and I'm joined today by Friedman Vartolo, Director of Client Relations, Michael Chisholm. What could this be?
There's a lot of problems with a generalized statement about investors. Some quick numbers, just to set the stage here. When we talk about large institutional buyers, you think Wall Street, Blackstone's, other major companies out there, those are considered mega institutional investors, and they hold over 1,000 properties across the country. They typically hold less than 1% of single family rentals. Cumulatively, they own less than about 1% to maybe, depending on numbers you see, maybe upwards of 2% of housing stock of national single family homes. Where you really see the rise is in mid-level or large investors looking at 10 to 100 properties. And that has really boomed in the past 5 years. They've gone up to purchasing upwards of, in 2025, about 20+% of single family houses in the market. So I think that really the first question here is, what is optics and what is reality, right? So you also don't know what the purpose of these investors are. Are they fix and flipping? Are they actually renting? How does this impact us? Well, if you're looking at just the large institutional Wall Street investors, you actually have investors who are net sellers. So Blackstone's and other large holders are selling more than they are retaining or buying. And I think we see this in foreclosure sales and third-party purchases that we see out in the real world in our side of the sector. But if you were to wholly say investors are no longer allowed to play in the market, then you're at least looking at, from the low end of institutional investors, 1%, to the mid-range of the large investors included, to the upward teens percentages of home property sales. What do you do in a market that just takes those buyers out? And the real problem is housing stock in general. So you have two competing ideas here of what's really causing the rise in housing prices across the country.
How do you see this actually impacting a foreclosing plaintiff or a foreclosing loan holder?
In a market that does not have high resale value or opportunity, how would you prevent an entity like an institution that owns a debt from being the competing and winning bidder on a property foreclosure sale? So does this mean more we don't want you going and contacting people and purchasing a home from a market that you want to invest in for rentals versus retaining a property that you have an interest in? Metro areas, Atlanta, where I live, or LA, even more so than in New York City, you have higher percentages of single family homes that are owned by those mega institutional holders versus Florida, where I think you're not seeing as many rentals, you're seeing more appetite for purchase. So if this were to ever become a policy, you definitely need someone who's thinking strategically for you, because there's a lot of open questions about how does the law in your area, if you're in a non-judicial state or a state like Connecticut that has a law day and they just convey title to you, you're not even bidding. There'd be a lot of open questions here about what you could do.
If you take this for what the headline is, and you just imagine there was a ban that said institutional buyers, some group of them, depending on the dividing line, cannot purchase single-family homes. The most tangible way this would impact the default industry would be at foreclosure sales. If that was not carved out, what that would mean is that there are less bidders at a foreclosure auction.
If you think about people who pay cash at auction sale, because how often do we see too, somebody comes in, bids upwards of the winning bid, and then they can't complete the sale because they don't actually have the money in hand. Then you're cycling people back into a cycle of debt. Yeah, I think that this is something where you have a boogeyman, and you don't often see the reality for the homeowner in that situation, which is a tough situation. And we truly, the law and the process, are trying to preserve equity for the person who owns or is in the property. So I think there's a lot of things where it's a double-edged sword. We all want to see better housing pricing, and I think we all want to see affordability and good housing policy. And what does that look like in the context of thinking through our part of the industry, which accounts for 7 to 8% home cycling through the housing market? So policy would have to be incredibly detailed, and we probably would see something that would not fill all of these needs or expectations.
Mike, I appreciate it. We'll continue to track. Thanks for joining Michael Chisholm and I on the Weekly Friedman, your source for the most essential information in the default industry. Thanks for tuning in and looking forward to seeing you next time.